All right, so we're gonna go ahead and get started, and thank you for coming to this presentation on the introduction of the next iteration of the state classification system. Just as a reminder, this system is intended to go into effect for the 25-26 school year, meaning that the testing that students are about to complete here in the spring will be the data that's used, um, and so that's kind of the time frame that we're on. Uh, Hopefully throughout this presentation, what you'll be able to hear is to understand the key features of the next iteration of the state classification system, some of the rationale behind the design choices, and then the timeline for moving forward. Um, Before I get started, though, I'd just like to remind everybody that this was the work of myself and a committee of members that really were built and assembled to leverage their practitioner expertise and their perspective. Um, we had 8 members who represented schools and districts with a wide range of enrollment sizes and socioeconomic realities, in the hope to be able to basically make it so that anyone across the state could point at somebody that was on that committee and say, they understand what my school is like. We met for approximately 41 hours of in-person and virtual meetings, and those meetings began with asking 5 questions. And those 5 questions really are, what do we have to do? What are we currently doing? What could we do? What should we do? And what are other states doing? From there, we moved on to establish fundamental priorities. We wanted to increase the process transparency and meaningfulness. And in that, what we're really hoping to do is make it so that you as practitioners can understand how your scores came about and ways to move them. Um, we wanted to focus on the factors of quality education systems. AQuEST has already spelled those out. One of the things that we're doing is we're moving away from the adjustments and the grouping of adjustment of indicators for an adjustment to everything counting, and everything carries its own weight and its own score. And then finally, we wanted to recognize multiple ways to be great. And a school might have great performance, it might have great improvement, or there might be multiple pathways for a school to get to a great final classification. We're going to talk about 4 major components of the classification system here today. The first is going to be the aggregation system. The second is indicators. The third is indicator and goal thresholds. And then finally, how it all gets put together to determine the final classifications. Before we jump into the new operationalization, I just want to remind everybody about the current operationalization. We started with status. Everything started with status. That provided a floor for everything that came after it. In the current version of the legacy system, we had 2 opportunities for positive adjustments. We had 2 opportunities for negative adjustments, but we haven't issued negative adjustments since returning from the pandemic. And a little later on, we're actually going to look at the indicators that go into the student achievement and growth tenet, and look at how the difference between those are playing out in the legacy system and the next system. And to get a final classification, we started with status, added any adjustments, and that was the final classification. So yes, a straightforward process, except that all of these scores were based on percentile rankings, or fairly difficult to determine scores. And so as we're moving to this next iteration, what we're moving to is something as simple as a weighted scorecard. Every indicator receives a classification level, has a specific indicator weight for that grade band, and we multiply the classification level times the indicator weight, and that gives us our indicator points. So that we move left to right, and then we move top down. So we sum all the indicator points, and that gives us our total indicator points. We sum all of the indicator weights, and that gives us a total applicable weight. And then we divide the indicator points by the applicable weight, and that gives us a raw classification. The reason for using the applicable weight is that we have schools that don't have enough students to have an English language proficiency score. And so in situations like that, what happens is this will be blank or have a 0. The indicator weight will show a 0. And so in this case, we would see a number that's either 93 or 91%. And then we would divide the indicator points by that 91 or 93%, and that would give us a raw classification. You'll see how that works here in a second. So the indicators that we're using in this new classification are relatively similar with one big change. However, there's some changes within each indicator that we're excited about. So status hasn't changed. It's still the percent of proficient um, full academic year students in English language arts and math. And we put those together and that gets the status score. Proficiency improvement is slightly different, where in the past we looked at non-proficiency reduction, and that was the trendline slope of students of the change in 3 years of the percent of students who were not proficient. Well, we took out the double negatives and made it a little easier to understand so that in proficiency improvement, we want to see that number increasing each year. And if it's continually increasing, that's going to get a higher classification level. In student growth, the way a growth point is calculated has not changed, but the numbers that we're calculating in there has changed. In the past, what we were using was a scale score that was not vertically aligned, meaning that a student could show an increase in scale score but be farther from proficient than they were previously. And because that wasn't right, what we've done is we've moved from scale score to percentile rankings. And so if a student is maintaining or improving their percentile rank, they'll get a growth point. Additionally, if they're advanced and stay in advanced, they'll also get a growth point. And then the total growth points earned through ELA and math are divided by the total points possible, and that'll get us our student growth score. At combined graduation rate, and for the rest of the indicators down, what you'll see is 2 bullet points under each indicator. And what those 2 bullet points are we've called them paired goals, but they're 2 measurement points for each indicator. And so in combined graduation rate, what we're looking at is the percent of students who in a 4-year and 7-year cohorts who were eligible to graduate. So in the 4-year rate, we're looking at the percent of students who are graduating in 4 years, not including the students who are continuing on due to IEP decisions. So that's a change in itself in the system. So that's combined graduation rate. I'm sorry, it's 7-year, the 4-year and the 7-year extended rates combined at 51% and 49%, just as it was to provide the combined graduation rate. The graduation rate improvement is looking at the year-to-year change in the combined graduation rate. So let's say you were at 82% last year and you're at 83% this year. That's not a 5% improvement, but it is an improvement. So you would get a 2. And the way that most of these improvement goals work, showing 0 or negative improvement is a 1, showing some improvement but less than 5% is a 2, and showing 5% improvement or better is a 3. That same calculation goes into effect for post-secondary readiness rate improvement. However, post-secondary readiness is a completely new indicator, and so we don't have any legacy scores for that. What we're looking at in post-secondary readiness rate is the percent of students who have earned one or who have completed one or more of 5 menu items. Those 5 menu items are to complete 2 or more dual credit AP, IB, or Cambridge International classes, to have successfully earned the seal of biliteracy, that have are essentially concentrators in a CTE pathway of study, meaning they've taken 2 or more capstone or intermediate courses in the same pathway. Students who have completed a work-based learning program, and students who earned the college and career readiness benchmark in ELA, math, and science. So a student only counts one time, but any student could earn 1 or more of those menu items. In science proficiency, we're nothing has changed with that. We're still looking at the percent of students who are proficient in science, the full academic year students who are proficient in science. Science proficiency improvement is looking at year-to-year improvement in that. In English language proficiency, we have a slight difference here. Our first measurement point is overall the percent of students who took the ELPA 21 or the Alt-ELPA in the district or school and were proficient. That rate is the English language proficiency rate. progress towards English language proficiency is calculated the exact same as it has been. We're still looking at the percent that are on track or making partial progress. The big difference here is that those are all thresholded out rather than receiving a standardized score. Chronic absenteeism reduction is also a little different. And part of this is because we heard what you were saying to us about chronic absenteeism, and in a number of cases, what we heard was our chronic absenteeism rate is low, and it's hard for us to reduce it by 5% each year. And so, so the performance indicator or performance measurement point for chronic absenteeism reduction is simply the chronic absenteeism rate. And so we're looking at that. Additionally, we're looking at chronic absenteeism reduction. The first place to earn a point, a classification level in this is in the 10-year 50% reduction of your chronic absenteeism. If you make the 10-year 50% reduction goal for that year, you get a 4. If you're showing improvement over from year to year, you'll get over 5%, you'll get a 3. If you're showing improvement but less than 5%, it's a 2. And if you're showing an increase in chronic absenteeism, you'll get a 1 in the chronic absenteeism reduction rate. However, you get the higher of the measurement points for the indicator score, and you'll see how that works in just a second. Participation has not changed. We're still looking at the percent of students who were enrolled and tested on the day of testing in ELA, math, and science. Participation score improvement is looking at that change over year to year. And student discipline rate is looking at the percent of students who did not receive an out-of-school suspension or expulsion in the school or district. And student discipline rate improvement is looking at that change from year to year. It is easiest to understand exactly how this all works in practice. And so what we're looking at here, if you remember back to the legacy operationalization, these are the 3 indicators that went in to make up a student achievement and growth adjustment. These are actual district scores, and this district did not receive a positive adjustment in the year they were pulled from. So this district proficiency improvement, it was a negative 0.51, which is less than or equal to 0, so they receive a classification level of 1. In student growth, this district was at 65.12%. That range was greater than or equal to 60%. That's a 4. It's science proficiency, we have our first example of a paired goal. And so science proficiency, they're at 88.68%. That is greater than or equal to 85%, and that means they get a 4. And we're looking at proficiency improvement. They were at 53.02% improvement. That's greater than or equal to 5%. And so that would get a 3, but a 4 is bigger than a 3. And so they get a 4. And so when we plug this into the scorecard, what we see is proficiency improvement of 1, student growth of 4, and science proficiency of 4. Again, we work left to right and we get the indicator points in there. So 0.12, 0.48, and 0.32. This district earned a 3 in classification, so their indicator points are 0.9. I'm not going to do this for all of the numbers because I don't think you want to hear me read all of these, but these are the rest of their classification levels. Again, left to right, that gives us these total indicator points, and then we work top down, and this total indicator points is 2.98. The total applicable weight in this case is 100%, and you'll remember if I said if they didn't have enough students for an English language proficiency score, this 7% would go away, and this would be 93%. They do have those students, enough of those students, and so it's 2.98 divided by 100%, which for a non-math guy is great, 2.98. And then to determine the final classification, we simply look at this table. We start with a raw classification of 2.98, and to get the final classification, we simply look at this 4th column on the left. 2.98 is not greater than 3.15, so that's an O. It is between 2.7 and 3.14, so we can circle that. We can look across the chart, and it's a final classification of great. And so this is a place where the process is pretty simple. We currently have available to folks a classification calculator that allows you to start predicting and projecting what your score is using numbers from this year for next November. That's available at aquest.com/resources. And The final steps of looking at the chart here are all automated, so you just have to put in your raw numbers, and you can see what those classifications may roll out for. One thing that didn't change in all of this was our overall final classifications. We still have excellent, great, good, and need support to improve. But in this effort of trying to be more transparent and meaningful, what we've realized is that there are also some guiding questions that are inherently coming from these classifications. For instance, for excellent, the question is, how do we fine tune these? What do we need to do to fine tune these scores so that we can be sure we'll get another excellent? For great, how do we sustain and extend this so that we can move from great to excellent? If we're good, how do we focus? Where do we need to focus to move from good to great? And if we need support to improve, the root question is, what must change right now? What do we have to do to make an impact on that final classification? So as we look at the time frame moving forward, we started these conversations and rolling this system out in July at Administrators Days, and we started presenting the next iteration then. We took a little break in October and November to release the final classifications for the legacy system. And then in December, January, and February, we started the process of recalculating all of these numbers for this next iteration, and then posting them and making them available here last week in the new portal. And so starting tomorrow, we've got office hours that everybody's more than welcome to sign up for, and we can start talking about the new system year scores and what you can do to change those scores to something you're more happy with if you're not happy with your scores. These types of presentations will continue on through spring and fall. Excuse me. And then in November, again, we'll come around and release these classifications using the next iterations and the 25-26 data. So some final takeaways that I hope you're able to get from this is we really worked hard to prioritize transparency, meaningfulness, and usefulness. We wanted to use performance and improvement to determine classifications. And this was designed with practitioners every step of the way, modeling data at each step. And so I'm pretty excited to say at this point that if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them and say thank you. This is my contact information. And if you'd like to take a minute and take a picture of that QR code, you are more than welcome to. It just takes you to a survey to help me get better at doing this kind of presentation. I'm going to. So now I would be